top story that we are covering here, all eyes, of course, on Tucson, Arizona, for the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. It is now day 13 of this. Now, this is file video that her daughter, Savannah Guthrie, released, obviously, of her mom when she was much younger, with Savannah as a little girl, her sister, Annie, as a little girl, and then her brother as well in that video. This, of course, the surveillance video of the person that the FBI is now calling a suspect. But I want to bring you up to speed here on what the latest information is. First of all, the FBI has now doubled the reward to $100,000. It was $50,000, now it's up to $100,000. They are also asking for people living within 2 miles of Nancy Guthrie's home to submit any surveillance video that includes cars, people from the dates of January 1 up until February 2nd. So that's a whole 1 month time period there. They are also describing the suspect as being 5'9" to 5'10" with an average build, and that backpack that they've identified it as being the brand Ozark Trail Hiker, and that is only sold by Walmart. Also, the gloves. There are multiple gloves, 2 that were found on the side of the road and some brush about 2 miles away from where the Nancy Guthrie lives, as well as a glove that was found inside the home. And also a white tent was put up outside yesterday. So I'm going to bring in our expert right now, Ralph Cilento. Ralph, again, thank you so much, because your insight here is so tremendously, beneficial, because you are able to put all of us in the minds of all of those investigators that are out there, whether it's with the Pima County Sheriff's Department or the FBI. So, and also I just want to say you are retired from the NYPD, and you were the lieutenant commander of detectives with the NYPD. So a very important job while you were serving this city. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
So the first thing I want you to tell me is, I want to talk about the FBI reward being doubled to $100,000. What does that say to you? Does that say they are gleaning and they are getting more information now and they are closer to maybe resolving this, or they are not close and they need to ratchet up that amount to get more people interested?
Well, both things are happening. So the fact that they upped the reward is not good, quite frankly, as far as leads go.
Okay.
It means they don't really have anybody. Increasing the reward will encourage people to come forward, assuming that somebody knows something and they're not being forthright with it. And what you have to ask yourself is, anybody who knows this perpetrator, does anybody that knows him won't turn him in for $100,000? I don't think so. So the higher the reward goes, the more it ups the pressure around the people around him who might know that he's involved with it to turn him in, even quietly behind the scenes. So believe me, nobody he knows won't turn him in for $100,000.
Right.
On the flip side, it's not great for it just seems to me that they're not anywhere, right? They don't have any hot leads. That would be the case when they're upping the reward. They're saying, please help us, please help us. So you are going to get more people that call. Now, all of those leads have to be dealt with, good, bad, or ugly, right? Some people are just kooks out there. Some people really think that they know something and they're just mistaken. And other people might have, nefarious goals in order to create a lead. And some people might really have information. So every one of those leads, good, bad, or ugly, is going to have to be run down.
Okay.
And that's going to take a lot of manpower.
Right. Now, let me ask you this, because one of our viewers is actually asking, the white tent that was set up out in front of the front doorway yesterday.
Right.
Everybody saw that video. FBI
Yes.
agents were back there for obviously dealing with forensics. What were they doing there? What was going on? What were they rebuilding, reenacting? What was happening?
Well, I don't think it's as much they were reenacting. What they were using was tools that involve light to measure. So there was some speculation that they put the tent up to block out the media's view. I don't think that's the case based on my information. I think it was just that they were trying to create a dark area so that their lighted forensic tools will work. And the tools they were using were to establish the person's height, right? So if they're using lasers and whatnot, by the way, establishing somebody's height with forensic tools, this is not difficult. Most every police department can do this. And, you know, you can have laser tools the way the FBI had, because the FBI has all the cool toys. But there are much more rudimentary academic ways to do that. And you could just measure one of the bricks, right? And proportionally, you could say by perspective, how tall is a brick? And then you count the amount of bricks. You know, when somebody enters a house and a victim sees the person leave the house, they can estimate the distance between the top of their head and the top of the door frame, and then their precise height could be calculated within an inch or so. So the FBI has much more, you know, fancy tools, which is probably what they were doing under that 10, using the tools to create, using the 10 to create a dark area so that they can use their lighting measurement tools.
And what they determined from that is that they're now saying that he is between the heights of 5'9" to 5'10". He's got an average build, and the average build you can actually see from that video. You know, he's not extremely overweight. He's not thin. He's got like an average build. Also, there was a lot of information coming out yesterday that the Pima County Sheriff decided to go ahead and send the gloves, whatever gloves have been found. There are 2 that were found on the side of the road. Apparently, there was one also found inside the house. Guys, can we just keep the crunching down for a little bit? We have people here eating in the newsroom. It is lunchtime. But anyway, they are sending those gloves instead of sending it to the FBI's lab, which is in Quantico, Virginia. They decided to send it to a private lab in Florida. And then there were various reports yesterday that the county sheriff was withholding information from the FBI and actually battling the FBI on this, and that the sheriff is the lead in this investigation instead of the FBI. But then earlier today, the county sheriff, he responded to that, saying, no, that is absolutely not true. The FBI and I were all on the same page. We were all in agreement that it should go to the private lab in Florida that I have used many times instead of going to the FBI lab. Does that make sense to you?
I think everything you said makes sense up until the FBI and the sheriff are on the same page that it should go to a private lab in Florida. There are marquee laboratories in the United States. One of them is definitely the FBI lab. The FBI lab sets forensic policy throughout the country. Coincidentally, the NYPD lab is also extremely respected, and in conjunction with the FBI lab, set policy for forensics across the United States. So I think that it's great that they're showing the flag together and that they're all on the same page. I'll leave your viewers to their own devices whether or not they think that's true. But I cannot see the FBI agreeing to send DNA evidence to a private lab in Florida. Now, I'm not casting aspersions upon that lab. It may be a great lab. And for all we know, the sheriff's office maybe has a contract with that lab. However, once the FBI gets involved, I think you have to defer to the FBI lab. And I think the initial problem with that, which is causing a lot of consternation between people that are working on this case, is that they don't want the evidence going in 2 different directions. Now, I will say something about the gloves and DNA that's recovered. When you send DNA to a lab to try to attempt to get a match, if you put your foot on the gas, which is definitely being done in this case, you could probably have an answer in less than 20 hours if there's a direct match with that DNA. The fact that they have not come out and said, right, we are deducing here, we're going to make a deduction based on the fact that they've had that glove, there's DNA recovered, and it's gone to the lab, and they have not come out and said, hey, we have a match and a suspect, we're looking to go get them, tells me that there is no match in the repository.
Oh,
So you would think at some point they're going to go out to familial DNA
right.
and try to get a DNA type, which could cast a net of 40 or 50 people. If you're talking about going out to somebody's second cousin who was arrested for a DNA offense and their DNA profiles in CODIS. The point is, whichever lab it went to, if I was running that investigation, I would have deferred to the FBI, right? Unless you're in the NYPD, because the NYPD lab is every bit as good as the FBI lab.
Right.
So, but if you're any place else other than the NYPD or the FBI, I think it would have been my decision to defer to the FBI lab. Now, the sheriff may have had his reasons. I'm not there with him, so I don't know. Maybe they signed a contract with that lab. Who knows? But what's more important than what lab it went to is the fact that they have not come out and said, hey, this DNA has gone here. We have a match. The fact that they have not come out and said that tells me that there's no match in the repository, which means at some point.
Ralph, if I could interrupt you here for a second, because you watch TV and they talk about DNA and being tested in a lab, and it's like within 48 hours or 24 hours, you have either, it's a match or not. How long does it normally take to test an item for DNA to see if you have a match? What's an average amount of time on that?
Well, that's sort of a difficult question to answer because a lot of it depends on the severity of the crime. In other words, if you have a child victim of a sex crime and there's DNA recovered, that's going to go to the top of the list. Where if you have a warehouse burglary and the perpetrator cut his finger and you get blood from there, this is a property crime. And so it's handled when it gets handled. It gets put in the batting order and gets handled as handled. In other words, violence is what gets attention. The more violent the crime, the more you have standing to ask for a rush on that DNA. So you would not recover DNA from a warehouse burglary and call the lab and say, please, I need an answer on this right away. If you have a homicide victim, a child sex crime victim, a murdered police officer or something, right? There are things where you'd have to call the lab. The actual analysis takes about 12 to 18 hours.
About 12 to 18 hours. So that they were able then, the gloves that they found on the side of the road, they were able to get that information by now because it's been more than 18 hours, correct?
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Right, which is the point I was making before, that the fact that they haven't come out and said, hey, we have a subject, it's Joe Blow, let's go get him, tells me that there's not a direct match in the CODIS database in the repository.
Okay, let me ask you this then. Another question that we have is that why do they keep going back to Annie Guthrie's house, to her and her husband's home? They live close by. They are pretty much the caretakers of the mom, because they live close by there. The mom is 84 years old. And so I'm wondering, because when you do, like my parents are 83 and 84, so you are involved in their lives, whether it's their medical, what's going on with them medically, or you tend to share things like housekeepers, landscapers, handymen. If you need a driver for something, you tend to share that. Could they possibly be going back to Annie's house over and over because they're trying to look for DNA evidence on maybe somebody who works for them, who also did work for the mom? It could have even been one day. And they're looking for some type of, some special material from a sweater or something like that. Could that be going on here? Because that is a big question that a lot of people have, is why do they keep going back to her home?
Well, there's two answers for that. One is, I think you've identified it correctly. Early on in the case, if you'll pardon the pun, all of that housekeeping is done right away. Give me a list of everybody who's ever set foot on this property. Your plumber, your HVAC guy, right? The guy who cleans the driveway, the guy who power washes your house. Whoever that is, they have that was done probably within the first few hours. And likewise for all the children. Okay. So yes, what you said could be true. They could be over there trying to get DNA from the housekeeper or the plumber or whatever, because they share tradesmen. That's totally possible. What else is possible is what we were talking about, yesterday, is that, everyone's a suspect until they're not a suspect. We don't really know what they're looking for over there. What you've just speculated is 100% reasonable and possible. It's also possible that Annie or her husband or her husband's friend are suspects. I mean, I'm not saying they are, but who knows? Everyone is in it until they're not in it, until they can be ruled out exclusively.
Until they're eliminated. Excuse me just a
Correct.
second, Ralph. We've got some questions coming in. Suzanne, what was one of the questions?
Sure.
No? Okay, I thought we had a question from somebody because we have a QR code that's up on the screen that people can scan that and they can ask questions, while we're doing the interview with you.
Right. Of course, I'll be happy to answer anything that comes in.
Thank you, Ralph. We appreciate it. The other thing too, and you've said this over and over, there are two reasons for a kidnapping. One is money. Another one is revenge. Those are the
Right.
two main reasons. But I was thinking
Generally.
back on something. You remember when Elizabeth Smart, she was 14 years old, Salt Lake City, Utah. This was back in 2002. And a handyman who had done some work at their home kidnapped her, came into the home with a knife, kidnapped her right out of her bedroom, and her younger sister was sleeping in the bed right next to her. Kidnapped her. It wasn't for money and it wasn't for revenge. He and his female companion were demented sex offenders, and they went on while they held her for 8 or 9 months to sexually abuse her. So that wasn't for money and it wasn't for revenge.
Right. Well, generally speaking, in the kidnappings that I've worked, it's almost always for money or revenge. Now, when you kidnap a small child like that, it opens up another pocket, another possibility, right? So, I mean, I don't, God forbid, I don't think anybody's kidnapping Miss Guthrie for sex abuse purposes, but, this is Smart was a very, very young child, but generally speaking, not always, generally speaking, the two greatest motives are kidnapping are revenge and money. Somebody's either mad at you or they know that you're wealthy, right? We're talking about kidnapping for ransom, right? They want money or they're angry, right? So in the Smart case, she was a child. These were demented sex predators. It's not always the case that it's for money or revenge, but in almost all kidnappings, it's money or revenge.
Okay, and at this point, again, because we're 13 days in, it does not appear to be money at this point. And those ransom notes for the Bitcoin, at this point, they have been determined that they were bogus, that they weren't real. So who could be seeking revenge?
Okay, well, one of the things that has to be considered, which really doesn't square with this case, but really nothing is normal about this. There is nothing normal about this kidnapping. We don't have her body, alive or dead. We don't have it. Where is she? Right. So let's assume, I've heard some people speculating that it was a burglary gone bad. I don't think it was a burglary gone bad, because the last thing a burglar wants, if a burglar is interrupted by the homeowner, the last thing they want is to have to deal with a live body. So even if things go bad and the person is killed, they're not going to drag them out. They're going to leave them there and run out, which means somebody would have gone into the house, discovered Miss Guthrie's body, and said, oh, maybe this was a burglary gone bad. They removed her from the property. But then you're right about the fact that these ransom notes are sort of arbitrary, and it's almost like they're being investigated as a separate investigation, like a two-pronged investigation. Ordinarily, the ransom note and the family and the body and the money, all that goes hand in hand. But this is almost being investigated as an ancillary, like a byproduct. At this point, I think the FBI knows that these are kooks coming in with these ransom demands, trying to get money. And if that's the case, we don't really know at all. We don't really know whether or not the family has ever had any contact with the kidnapper at all, with the person who actually has her. We don't really know that.
Right. And at this point, like you're saying, none of this really seems to make sense at this point.
No, the whole thing is very, very odd. The way the person approached the house, it's almost like they were prepared with gloves and a mask. Yet we have this absolute junior varsity clown routine of trying to cover up the camera with a bush, a piece of
Right.
a branch. If you're going to go there to kidnap somebody and defeat the camera, wouldn't you have a hammer in your pocket or a piece of duct tape stuck to your sleeve so you could just put it over the lens? I mean, it's on the one hand, they look prepared. On the other hand, it looks like a clown show. So I'm not really sure what was going on there. So now we have her body removed. We know for a fact that her blood was there because that DNA did come back. So wherever she is, she was injured, but there's no sight of any vehicle. And how are you going to move, 130, 150-pound person
Right.
with no vehicle?
Right.
So the entire thing is very, very odd.
Right. And what do you think about the fact now that that investigators are now reaching out to the public and saying, look, we need you to look for surveillance video, anything that you might
Yeah.
have at all, dating from January 1st until February 2nd. That's a solid month.
Yeah, yeah.
What does
Long
that
time.
tell you?
That's a lot of data. A lot of data, right?
Yeah. And the other thing, too, that I found really interesting is that on the roadways out there and the highways, they have cameras, but the cameras don't record anything. They're just there to deal with whether you're speeding or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cameras, there are cameras all over the highway and they serve different purposes for different things.
Right, right. But from what I was reading, none of the cameras out there record anything. Is that wrong?
No, well, maybe they'll want to revisit that.
Okay.
I think every camera should go into some kind of cloud. Otherwise, what's the purpose? Unless you're doing a live surveillance feed, what's the purpose of having that camera?
Right.
I think the more people, I think the bigger pitch they put onto the public, I think the better it is. Right? Obviously, they're nowhere. Right?
Wow.
We could try to put lipstick on a pig and make it seem great, but they're nowhere. I mean, even the height that they gave out, a 5'9", 5'10"
Right.
male. I mean, I'm 5'10" when I'm
Right.
wearing cowboy boots.
Right. Right.
So I mean, that's
Mhm.
not really average height, average build. 5'10" is the average male.
Right.
So they're working really hard.
Okay. The other thing too, if we can go ahead, Susanne, let's show that surveillance video again of the suspect approaching the door there. What always struck me from the moment that I saw this is how comfortable. Let's show the video. How comfortable he was. He's not nervous. He doesn't
No.
look jittery. He looks
No.
just very casual, like he's done this before.
Right. Well, he's done it before, or he's not worried about getting caught. Her house is sort of, in a dark neighborhood, no street lights. Maybe he's just not worried about getting caught, or he's done it before. You're right; both things are possible. But you're right. He, on the one hand, he seems very casual, like he's a seasoned criminal. On the other hand, it's a clown show out there. He's got the holster slung down in his crotch.
Mm.
He's got a holster that's made for a revolver, but according to the video, it looks like he's got a semi-automatic in there. He's not prepared to cover up the lens. He doesn't bring anything to disable the camera.
Right.
A simple hammer or screwdriver would have done that, and yet he's wearing gloves and a ski mask.
Do you think he didn't know maybe that Ring camera was there?
How could you not know that?
I don't know.
If you went there to kidnap her, how could you not know that? Right? How could you be surprised by a camera?
Right.
And if he is, then that just goes to the point that he's an amateur criminal.
Right.
Amateur criminal or not, he's outfoxing all of us because nobody knows where he is.
That's
And
right.
nobody knows where Miss Guthrie is.
Mm.
So as bad as he is, right, you'd rather be lucky than good. As bad as he is, he's gotten away with it so far.
That's right. He's still
But the
stumping.
backpack's a very good lead.
Okay. All right. Hey, Ralph, thank you so much for joining us again today. Again, your expertise, retired NYPD, and you were the lieutenant commander of the detectives here for the NYPD. Ralph Cilento, thank you so much again. We really appreciate you joining us.
Of course, anytime. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks again. Folks, we're going to